Hello, I'm William Michael, the headmaster and director of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And a few days ago, I posted a talk on how to fix Catholic schools, and I focused in that talk on the need to change the school model for Catholic schools to become sustainable and actually be able to provide for the needs of Catholic children. As I was thinking about that message, it became clear to me that that provides us with a good part one for a discussion about how to fix Catholic schools, but a part two is needed, which deals with the other key change that needs to be made, which has to do with the curriculum. So in this video, I'd like to speak to school administrators, school board members, anyone who has a significant role, administrative role in Catholic schools or in any private school to talk about the second fix that's needed, which has to do with the curriculum. When we look at a modern school curriculum, if I was going to make the greatest practical criticism of modern Catholic schools, which I think is acknowledged by most parents, is that modern Catholic schools are charging private school tuition for a public school education. And that's a problem that needs to be addressed. It's just not responsible. It's not just. I don't think it's fair. I think it's lazy on the part of the administration to put a product on the table that is equivalent to a secular public school program and then look to parents to pay a private school tuition for such a program. It's just not responsible. The administration is not doing its job. And when we look at the curriculum, we have to first of all acknowledge the shortcomings of the modern curriculum, and then we have to look at what's needed, how that is fixed by a classical Catholic curriculum, and how this would work in the 21st century. Now, just to be clear, I'm a classicist, but I'm not a traditionalist. I'm not nostalgic. I don't want to restore something from the good old days. I want to take principles that are timeless and bring them to bear on education in the 21st century, acknowledging all of the unique challenges that we face in the 21st century. Anyone who knows me and reads any of the articles that I publish or listens to talks that I publish knows that I am not for example, a Latin Mass Catholic trying to, maintain some old-fashioned European culture. I understand all the challenges of modern, secular, democratic society, and I've led the Classical Liberal Arts Academy to modern accreditation with Cognia, the largest secular accreditation agency in the world. So I want it to be understood that I am not promoting this sort of turning back of the clock and restoring something old because it's old. The principles of historic Catholic education are universal and timeless. They're unconditional. And we need to bring these principles into modern Catholic education. And we need to understand how to actually implement that in the modern educational context we live in. Most importantly, we live in a society that has compulsory education laws. That is a high-tech society that depends on a college system of education. We're not going to change those things. But there are changes that need to be made within that structure, within that system. And I believe that there are responsible ways to make those changes. When we look at the modern curriculum and we ask, where did this curriculum come from? We need to do a little bit of history study to go back to the 1800s. It's hard for us to be conscious of just how important the discovery of the New World and the foundation of the United States of America was. historically. We take it for granted, but it's a relatively recent development in world history. And if we think about the United States federal government being established around 1789, let's just round it off to 1800. And then think about the fact that we have this new society, this new constitutional democracy established with these layers of government, local, state, federal. We've got these checks and balances in political power. It's a situation, it's a society that has never existed before. And there was a lot to learn to be an American. In order to participate intelligently in American society, there was a good amount of education that was needed because this system of government was very complicated and demanded a lot of its citizens. Not like a monarchy where the common people just mind their own business and leave government to others. This whole idea of representative democracy means that the people have to be engaged and they have to know their rights and so on. They have to live according to the limits of the Constitution, and not just the federal Constitution, but also the state Constitution, local laws, and so on. It's a complex society to live in. So in the 1850s, there were a number of problems that led to the promotion of ideas for the establishment of public schools, state-funded schools that would be seen as the preventive remedy for problems that were developing in early America. Problems included, as I said, the need for the citizenry to be educated to understand how to participate in this new form of government. That democratic education was necessary. Secondly, there was enormous immigration at the time in the 1800s, and you had this very difficult situation where people are coming in with this idea of liberty and justice for all, but you've got people coming from all different countries and cultures and just being shoved into America, and they're not going to be able to live together. Their cultures differ, their preferences differ, everything about their lives is different, even their language is different. And so for this people, this melting pot of people to be able to function, there has to be some sort of process of Americanization. There has to be this process where all of these people are brought together and a single common culture is formed. And figuring out what that culture needs to be and all that was part of the challenge that America faced. But these challenges of Americanization, of democratization of the citizenry, coupled with a need to develop an economy. That's even the reason why the Constitution was established, was because America didn't have the financial foundation to be able to function. So that there needed to be a means of developing the economy and establishing a workforce of the American citizens. So I would argue that these three concerns led to the development of the public school philosophy, the public school project or experiment, we could say. America itself was an experiment in order to form people to live in America and allow America to fulfill its potential. And this was all theoretical. This public school system was necessary. And when we look at this public school system, it had three primary functions. Number one, to teach the American people how to live according to the Constitution. Secondly, to Americanize immigrants that were coming into the country from all over Europe at the time. And then thirdly, to develop an American workforce that could actually create a productive and profitable economy. Another concern they had, which became really important actually in the rhetoric that led to the approval and acceptance of this proposal of public schooling, was the need to prevent crime. Crime on the streets was a very significant problem. Schooling was not required, so kids could just be left on the streets while their parents work. While immigrants come in, kids were left without much to do, and where kids were working. They were working in unregulated environments where they could be easily exploited and put in danger, working in dangerous conditions and so on. So there were a number of practical problems, health and sanitation problems, safety problems, crime problems, and public schooling. One of the main rhetorical thrusts to get private schooling approved was the need to get these kids off the street and prevent crime. A good example for Catholics to think about, to consider this period and culture. If we think about the work of St. John Bosco in Italy, there were working mothers and fathers. There were kids left largely to themselves, kids running in the streets. There were kids being employed by business owners that took advantage of them. And John Bosco went as a missionary to those kids in order to save them from those circumstances. So if you were to read about or watch films about the life of St. John Bosco, it'll give you a good picture of the problems that kids were facing in the 1800s, and those problems were addressed by this proposal of public schooling. So those 3 or 4 things contributed to the development of this public school model. Now, what you'll notice was not involved, was not included, was religion. America made it very clear in the Constitution that the government did not have the right to establish a religion, and that made public schooling tricky because we had to bring these kids together, we had to provide them with an education, but we had to navigate between, religious controversies and things like that. And so the schools were by nature secular. They were non-sectarian, or so they claimed to be. But, experience found that at the time, because of the makeup of the American population, they tended to have a Protestant leaning. There was a Protestant bias in the public schools, even though they claimed to be non-sectarian, as I said. But anyway, we have this largely secular and utilitarian school system established, and we can't really complain about that because it was necessary. It was a necessary government project that needed to be developed just to deal with the reality of the circumstances that had evolved in America. So the public school system was developed. It had lots of challenges. It had to provide for all of the people. And also, at that time, another development was the push for compulsory education, that every child had to receive an education. And when they talked about this at the time, it meant basically an 8th grade education. So you also have compulsory education movements developing at the time and getting established in the early 1900s. So lots of stuff going on, all of which was practical. And the word I want to focus on is utilitarian. The schools were a utilitarian undertaking. There were practical problems that needed to be solved, and the public school system was developed as a solution to those practical problems. It was not religious. Now, as Catholics, we have to look at that and say, well, we can understand these benefits that the schools were created to offer, but is there really any such thing as a compulsory secular education? And is that a good thing? And experience has proven that that is not a good thing. That this use of the utilitarian concerns that developed the public schools, using that as an excuse to have no religious formation, or to have schools that, in order to maintain this secular character, have to intentionally avoid subjects and topics that were fundamental to learning and education throughout history, that are really fundamental to human intellectual formation. That creates a very significant problem. And so the utilitarian ends of public schooling the utilitarian ends, which include the need for this secular character, create some real significant problems. And, history has shown us the consequences of the attempt to provide such a program. So let's just get past all of that history. I think most of us know the history to some degree. But let's come to the current day. We've got Catholic schools in the 1800s again that developed, the parochial school system developed with a view to serve those utilitarian ends, but to do so in a Catholic way. So it was the utilitarian public school model, the utilitarian public school curriculum with, Catholicism sprinkled on top and created separately so that the Catholic kids didn't have to attend these secular schools, which were really Protestant schools. And, that can be demonstrated. If you'd like evidence that they were pro-Protestant, I can provide that evidence. Anyway, so the Catholic schools, and this was actually mandated by the plenary councils of Baltimore, which were convened at the time in the late 1800s. That's where the Baltimore Catechism came from. Most people are familiar with the Baltimore Catechism, but even more significantly, that's where the Catholic parochial school system came from. The councils of the Archdiocese of Baltimore established by decree the need for parishes to provide Catholic education for the children. Every child needed to be able, every Catholic child, every parish child needed to be able to attend a Catholic school. And obviously they couldn't have tuition. There was all of this, obvious difficulty in making this possible, but that was required by the plenary councils of Baltimore. So we've got the Catholic parochial school system developing, and the fatal flaw that occurred, and I talked about this in the first video on how to fix Catholic schools, was that the parochial schools chose to adopt and imitate the model that was developing for the public schools. And that model, again, it can function to serve the limited utilitarian ends of public schooling, especially because the public schools are government funded. So the schools do not need to be self-sustaining. They don't have to operate like a business and be able to stay in the black and avoid going into debt. So the model of the schools can be a little bit reckless because the funding of those schools is artificial and compulsory. We're just taxed to pay for these schools. So the public schools had a model that was designed to serve their utilitarian ends, and they had a means of providing financially for that model. The Catholic Church and parochial schools chose to follow that model, but they didn't have, especially long-term, they didn't have the financial means to sustain that model, and that's what we've seen unfold over the past 40, 50 years. It's just not sustainable for private schools to follow the public school model. So what's happened, again, it looked like it was going to be successful, and we have this sort of romantic history of the Catholic school system, the parochial school system, but that was because of the immigration of European Catholics and this artificial and unsustainable supply of religious men and women to staff these Catholic schools at the time. Men and women who worked for next to nothing, really lived with incredible sacrifices, and you can study about the experiences of these religious men and women who lived in poverty for the sake of the work of the parochial schools. It just wasn't sustainable. The supply of religious men and women was not maintained. They didn't reproduce themselves. They came from European culture and traditions that weren't present in America, and eventually that supply of teachers on which the whole system of parochial schooling depended, that supply ran dry, and the schools were left with, without the advantage that made them possible in the beginning. So that was the problem that led to the decline of Catholic schooling. So at that time, as this change happens, there's the need to shift to now have the schools staffed by lay people, and that's just completely financially unsustainable. If we look at modern numbers in America, a man to provide for a family, he needs to make at least $80,000 a year. I mean, if we want to be realistic, and I'm not talking about bare bones, having bread and water and clothing from a thrift store to keep us safe from the elements. I'm not talking about living in survival mode. I'm talking about realistic provision for a family in 21st century American society. We get numbers like 80,000 up to 100,000 as being necessary for a comfortable life for a family of four or more. And I know people will say, oh, you can live much cheaper than that. Yeah, sometimes you can when there are special circumstances. I mean, I'm an example of that. My parents retired, bought farmland in North Carolina, and I was able to inherit a piece of land and build a house for a fraction of what such a house would cost someone else. That's what made the Classical Liberal Arts Academy possible. So I understand that circumstances for certain individuals can allow them to raise a large family. I have 10 children, and I can provide generously for my family at a fraction of what it costs other families to do what our family does. But my situation is not normal. And the problem is taking examples of abnormal circumstances and using them as the foundation for a financial plan for school. You just see how that makes no sense. The problem with schools is that every teacher is going to need those circumstances to live on less. And that's what's not realistic. So when we look at the realistic numbers of what a full-time teacher, and I'm going to stick with a male teacher because ideally we don't want double incomes. We don't want childbearing women being forced to go and work for money to provide for their... Ideally, we don't want that situation. We want a man to be able to provide for his wife and children. And if we look at the needs of what that man has, he needs to earn $80,000 or more, depending on where he lives and what his circumstances are. It's just not sustainable. And so this is what we've run into. So now we're employing low-quality teachers who are working at low salaries. We're employing women who are usually pursuing a second income for their families. And we have to just hit the brakes on this and ask, is this really what we want to do? Is this really a good idea? So we have this problem with the model, and I'm sorry to go on about it, but I just want to make it clear that we can't propose this model and just pretend like everything is equal. There are flashing red warning lights all over this modern school model, and it's simply not sustainable. But what I want to do in this talk is move on to the second issue, which is the problem of the curriculum. So this public school system developed, and it had its own curriculum, which was designed to serve its utilitarian purposes. And we can all respect that, right? I don't criticize public schools because they have a secular political purpose that we could argue is necessary in our society. But the Catholic schools adopted this same curriculum. Now, there was really no alternative, because what happened, just think of this from a financial perspective. The publishers, seeing this public school system developed that was going to be funded by the government, they immediately shifted all of their attention to providing the publications, the textbooks, the teacher supplies, and so on, that were going to be used to serve these massive state-funded public schools. I mean, that's just good business. So the publishers all went for these government contracts on textbooks and school supplies and stopped producing other resources. So you can trace sort of a history of educational study materials from the 1500s through the early 1800s, and then all of a sudden everything narrows. And all we see produced after that point, after the late 1800s, are products that are appropriate for public schools. And so the availability of school resources radically changes as this public school system develops, and the Catholic schools largely adopt these modern resources. We see the development of a few major Catholic publishers. You can trace Benziger Brothers through the early 1900s and Sadler Publishing, which slowly becomes secular. But the way that books were published, what was published, how it was published, and so on, changed because of the development of this public school model. Catholic schools adopted the modern curriculum. And what is the modern curriculum? It basically comes down to 5 subject areas, and these are important, so you might want to jot these down. When we look at the modern school curriculum, which continues today, it's largely unchanged. We look at the modern curriculum, there are 5 core subject areas. The first is English language arts. The second is mathematics. The third are the natural sciences. The fourth is foreign language. And the fifth is social studies. Those are the 5 basic, essential, I would say, subject areas of the modern public schools. Again, English language arts, mathematics, natural sciences, foreign language, and social studies. That was true back then, that's true today. The Catholic schools adopted that curriculum. So they taught the English language arts, modern mathematics, modern natural sciences. So we've got now Catholic schools with laboratories in them, science and math-based schools, social studies, which were based on modern psychology and sociology, and then modern foreign languages. So not just foreign language, but modern foreign languages for the sake of business, foreign languages for the sake of travel, and so on. So that became the modern curriculum. Again, English language arts, modern mathematics, natural sciences, foreign language, and social studies. That curriculum served a utilitarian purpose, which was a portion of the role of education. All of the philosophical, all of the theological needs of men were removed from the curriculum for obvious reasons, because they depend on religious convictions, and the state said we have no authority from the Constitution to establish religious doctrines or beliefs or practices, so we have to avoid these subjects. So all of that, what used to be the core and focus of education, namely philosophy and theology, what used to be the end of education, like the Jesuits would say that the goal of their schools was to lead their students to know and love God. That was the explicit goal of their schools. That could no longer serve as the mission of the school. And so what used to be the focus of education, parents or local schoolmasters in a certain community raising children according to the convictions of their parents, that was now replaced with this limited utilitarian curriculum. Now, what's misleading about this modern school curriculum is that it seems that the kids are always busy. I mean, they go to school from 8 o'clock in the morning to 3:30 or so in the afternoon, 180 days a year. They're carrying around backpacks loaded with stuff. Now they're using computers. They've got so much work to do, all of these activities and exercises and assignments and so on. It seems like this is a rich curriculum, this modern curriculum, but that's all an appearance. It's misleading. What happens is The curriculum, this utilitarian curriculum is actually very, very thin. It's very, very thin, very shallow. For example, in the modern sciences, the kids don't actually learn science. They learn sort of this fake school science that just introduces them to artificial experiments and a summary or survey of knowledge according to the current consensus in the scientific community. That's what the schools do. It's very shallow. It's all introductory. Much of it is oversimplified, and so on. It's a very thin, very shallow course of study. If you actually look at the standards and what is covered in each year of schooling, you'll find that it's a very limited, very shallow amount of content. But that's all the content that there is. That's all the content that's allowed. And so what schools do is take that content and just puff it up with all kinds of activities. It's like the illustration that pops into my head is if you've ever bought sponges and they come where they're dried out and they're very thin, and then you take the new sponge out and wet it under the faucet and it expands and becomes this big sponge. That's what happens to this utilitarian curriculum. It's really this thin, shallow thing. But we've got all of this time. We've got these compulsory education laws saying the kids need to be in school until 8th grade, and then until 10th grade, and then until 12th grade. We've got this expanding amount of time and this very thin, shallow set of required studies, this minimal utilitarian curriculum. And so what the schools do is they just fill out the time with activities that relate to this thin curriculum. So the school day fills out. They've just got activities multiplying in all directions. They've got all kinds of projects. They're going to do skits. They're going to have, science fairs and math Olympics. And they multiply all of these activities just to fill out the time that they have with a limited body of content. So there's not a lot of content. It's actually very shallow, very light in terms of the standards. But because they have all of this time allotted, they do what they can to fill it out. This activity, we hear people complain about schools. We say, the kids are just doing busy work. It's just all busy work, and it's true. It is, that's very true. It is busy work. It's work that relates to the curriculum that fills out the time. When I was a school teacher, if I had an hour and a half block schedule to deal with my students, my situation was different because I was a classics teacher and I was sort of let free to do whatever I wanted. So I was teaching the kids complex classical studies. But if I was, let's say, a biology teacher and I had to cover one topic during this first week of the school year, and the textbook laid that out, it would only take me a day to get through the content. If I was going to teach them the content of the chapter and provide them with an assessment, we can get that done in 2 days. But we've got 5 days to work on. So the teachers begin inventing all kinds of activities, class trips, class activities, all sorts of things. But it's just filling out, and the teachers are largely left to do that, which again goes back to the problem with the model of the schools. But there's not a lot of content. It's a little bit of content. It could be covered in a short amount of time, but it's just expanded because there's so much time, and we can't bring other subjects in without getting people upset. So we've got this appearance of a fullness of a curriculum, but really it's like a new sponge. It's like a dried up sponge. It's very, very, very thin, very shallow. This is what the Catholic schools are offering. They're offering this utilitarian curriculum in the modern Catholic schools. It's just not appropriate. This is the second thing that has to be fixed. The utilitarian curriculum was not designed to serve the end of education for human beings. It's not sufficient. It was not intended to be sufficient. It wasn't designed to raise children to know, love, and serve God. It was designed to check the boxes of this utilitarian, minimal curriculum that would be used in public schools, where you couldn't have any religion. You had to be very careful getting into philosophy subjects because they could be tied to religion and could divide the community and exclude people and cause all kinds of trouble. The Catholic school adopted this and did the same thing, just puffed it out with all kinds of activity. You look at a Catholic school classroom, it looks just like a public school classroom. All the same methods, all the same busy work, all the same techniques for this shallow curriculum to be expanded to fill the space that it occupies in time because of compulsory education laws. So that's the second problem. The second problem is the Catholic schools are not providing the content that is appropriate for private schools. Again, it makes no sense. The Catholic schools are under none of the restrictions of the public schools. The public schools are restricted by the Constitution and not allowed to establish or promote any religion. The public schools are restricted by law to a minimal utilitarian curriculum. When we separate from that public system, walk away from public funding and say, we'll take care of the funding ourselves privately. We're going to have a private school, self-funded. We can do whatever we want in that school. We can have Catholic studies. We can teach scholastic philosophy. We can teach church history. We can study the Bible. We can study the lives of the saints and the catechism and so on. We can fill out that curriculum to be a curriculum that actually is appropriate for Catholic children. But what we see is the parochial schools not doing that. We see the parochial schools just bringing the public curriculum into the private school, which again, it makes no sense to do that. It makes no sense. And then they just fill the time with the usual busy work. That's the problem. So what I propose as a second thing that needs to be fixed to fix Catholic schools is the curriculum needs to be expanded. The curriculum needs to be expanded. I believe, as I think through the practical implementation of this, I believe this can be done in a modern school. I don't believe that most modern school administrators are capable of doing it. I don't believe most modern school teachers are capable of implementing it by themselves, but I believe that it can be implemented in a practical way in existing modern schools. And here's how. I'll share what I've been able to work out as the method for implementing a necessary change. First of all, the 5 categories, the 5 subject areas of the modern curriculum, they need to be changed. So English, language arts, math, science, foreign language, and social studies, they need to be replaced by more appropriate subject areas that are basically, the way I would like you to think about it is, they're much bigger containers. Much bigger containers. The first container, and again, I know that most modern administrators and teachers are not going to know what this stuff is because they've all been educated in modern schools. They've got their teacher certification, which means that they're a licensed agent of the state to work in public schools, which, again, why that has anything to do with Catholic schooling makes no sense. Totally irrelevant for Catholic schools. But the administrators and the teachers are not going to know this stuff. And again, I don't think that's a problem because, as I explained in the first video, the school should not be dependent on the knowledge of administrators or teachers. The school should establish their own curriculum, and it's my intention to help do that. But we need 5 different subjects in Catholic schools. They need to be much bigger containers. The first is the trivium, and I'll explain what this means in a minute. I'm at 40 minutes right now. I'll try to be quick. The first subject area is the trivium. The second is the quadrivium. The third is philosophy. The fourth is theology. And the fifth is humanities. So we've got 5 different curriculum containers, as it were, content containers, much, much bigger, broader, deeper containers. We're not dealing with that shallow, dried out, utilitarian sponge curriculum anymore. We're dealing with a much broader, fuller, we're not filling it out with busy work. We're dealing with a substantial curriculum with subjects that are big, packed containers, packed with content that relates to the Catholic life, Catholic education. The trivium, the quadrivium, philosophy, theology, and the humanities. Those should be the 5 subject areas in a Catholic school. Now, when we talk about the trivium, we're talking about classical language arts. We're talking about Latin grammar, Greek grammar. We're talking about, becoming fluent readers of the classical languages. But we're also talking about reasoning and rhetoric. Those are the 3 arts of the trivium. Reasoning, as incomprehensible as this is, reasoning, the art of reasoning, is not even a part of the modern Catholic school curriculum. That's how crazy this has become. The kids are not taught the art of reasoning in schools. And I don't mean they're taught critical thinking, like all this baloney school talk. I'm talking about the actual art of reasoning is not studied or taught in modern schools. The teachers don't know it. The administrators don't know it. And the consequences of that are what we would expect. But the trivium consists of grammar, of reasoning, and rhetoric, those 3 arts. Now, what we can see is in that container, which includes these classical studies, there is room also for the modern English language arts. That container can hold the modern curriculum and also the classical Catholic curriculum. So we can see it's a much bigger, much more densely packed container for the curriculum, this first category of the trivium. The second is the quadrivium. And traditionally, or classically, I should say, we had classical arithmetic, which is not to be confused with arithmetic in modern schools, as I'll explain. We've got classical arithmetic, classical geometry, classical music, which is not, it's not band practice, not choir practice. Classical music and classical astronomy. So arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Those were the 4 arts of the mathematical quadrivium. Now that's a packed container, right? We're studying the arithmetic of the ancient, philosophers, geometry of Euclid, and so on. That's a packed container. But when we look at that container, we see that modern mathematics, which are all practical, that's the difference between classical arithmetic and modern arithmetic, is that modern arithmetic is applied number theory, used in calculation and so on. The quadrivium as a container can accept the content of modern mathematics in addition to the content of the classical liberal arts curriculum. So we can take the modern English language arts and add them to the trivium, and we can take the modern mathematical curriculum and add that to the quadrivium. The third curriculum subject area is philosophy. And when we look at the modern curriculum, there is no philosophy. Again, crazy to think that Catholic schools would pretend that philosophy is just, not important in light of church history, but that's what they do. There's no philosophy in the modern school curriculum. So we would have to establish the philosophy subject area and teach moral philosophy. There's no moral philosophy in the modern school curriculum. Just let that sink in. Moral philosophy. Ethics is not a part of the modern school system because it will upset a diverse population. Even though it's based on reason, it's not included. Moral philosophy, natural philosophy, the philosophy of the world. Talk about the origin of the world. Talk about the purpose or end of created things. Not included in the modern curriculum. Massive, massive gaps, inexplicable gaps in modern education. That if we brought, Catholic doctors of the church back to look at these schools, they wouldn't even understand what they were looking at. To think of education that doesn't teach the philosophical sciences, it's just nuts. But the third subject area would be philosophy, and we would bring this philosophy back into Catholic schools, teaching philosophy systematically in Catholic schools. And if we look at the modern curriculum and say, well, how does this get implemented in a modern school? Science is philosophy. Science is philosophy. So if we look at biology classes, chemistry classes, physics classes, they are altogether a kind of philosophy. They're called inductive philosophy. It's a certain approach or method of seeking knowledge of created things. It's by means of the senses, by means of observation, by means of experimentation. It's a different kind of reasoning. It's a kind of philosophy. So we would establish philosophy as the subject area, a much broader, much deeper, much more densely packed container of study material. And we would move the natural sciences into that philosophy container as one branch of philosophy. So we've taken care of English language arts, moved that into the trivium. We've taken care of modern mathematics, moved that into the quadrivium. And let me clarify. What I'm not saying is we replace the trivium with modern English language arts. That's what the fake classical schools have done. If you listen to someone like Martin Cawthron from, I think he works for Memoria Press, listen to him talk about how like modern algebra just replace it. No. That's total nonsense. The quadrivium is a set of arts and sciences that already exists and needs to be studied. We're adding to that the modern practical mathematic courses that were developed for this utilitarian school system. We're adding that to the quadrivium. We're not replacing the quadrivium with it. We're not relabeling modern math and calling it the quadrivium. That's what fake classical schools are doing, and it's just a cover-up. It's total con job for what actually needs to be done. We need to add modern sciences to the container of philosophy, which is already packed with stuff to be studied. Next, we come to foreign languages, and we can look at modern foreign languages, and we see people are concerned about being able to speak Spanish because where they live or in their parish or in business or in travel, they need to communicate with Spanish-speaking people. It's utilitarian again. It has a practical purpose, or maybe French or maybe German. We're presented with these modern languages, Chinese even, for the sake of business. Politics. So we see in modern schools, modern foreign languages. Well, when we look back to the classical curriculum, we see Latin and Greek and Hebrew as the classical languages. That's the ancient sacred languages. These modern foreign languages are useful. They are important in modern life. I can speak Spanish fluently. I can read Spanish, French, Italian, a little bit of German. Very useful. No one's going to deny that, but it needs to be added to the classical languages because they're important for our Catholic life. The sacred scriptures are in Hebrew and Greek. Much of the writing of church history is in Latin. the classical languages are timeless and very important because they're part of our sacred tradition. And so they all need to be studied. And again, I'm not saying we need the Latin Mass. You see, please listen to what I'm saying. It includes Hebrew, it includes Greek, it includes Latin, and it extends to the modern languages, to Spanish and Italian and French and German and English, and even into modern business languages, Chinese and so on. All of that comes under, would be included rather in a combination of the trivium, where we could bring, let's say, the study of the grammar of the modern languages under the trivium, and then also under humanities, which we'll get to in a minute. Because, like, for example, I used to teach AP Spanish and would lead students through the study of works like Don Quixote, which would be considered literature. That's humanities. So we'll get to humanities in a second. So the foreign language category in modern schools gets divided between the trivium and humanities. The fourth category in the curriculum that I would propose would be theology. Pretty ridiculous that, again, not even taught in modern schools. And what theology is, the reason why theology is so controversial, is because theology says that this information, the content of these studies, has been revealed to us by God. The content of these studies has been revealed to us by God. So you see, this is a lightning bolt that divides society. This is a subject area that assumes faith. It cannot be in a modern school. It cannot be in a public school. And not only does it need to be in a Catholic school, but it is the beginning and the end of Catholic education. It's the ultimate subject, the first and the last subject. It's based on divine revelation. This is where we study what God himself has revealed to us. And it begins with sacred scripture, of course. So the study of sacred scripture, Catholic students should be thoroughly trained in the knowledge of the Catholic Bible. Really inexcusable that they're not. It's divine revelation. So that's the first thing, studying the sacred scriptures all through their schooling years. And then secondly, because the church is established by Christ as the only authoritative interpreter of divine revelation, which includes not only sacred scripture, but Christ himself, right? The Word, God's revelation in the flesh. Because the church is established by Christ as the only authoritative interpreter of divine revelation, we have this whole treasury of sacred tradition, which we can really summarize as liturgical life and systematic theology and so on. The writings of the fathers and doctors of the church, the catechisms of the church, papal documents, the documents produced by councils and so on. All of this is included in sacred tradition. So we've got sacred scripture and sacred tradition, the two parts of theology in Catholic education, and that needs to become one of the five curriculum categories. And then lastly, the humanities. The humanities, to put it simple, are history and literature. History and literature are the two main focal points of the humanities. So we have the study of world history, the study of European history, of American history, of our own individual, national, even state histories, often required by compulsory education laws. But in addition to that, church history, the lives of the saints, also comes under the humanities. And then as we get into literature, the whole history of biblical literature, sacred literature. But outside of the scriptures, we have all kinds of ancient literature, classical literature from Greece and Rome and the ancient world. We've got medieval Catholic literature, we've got Muslim literature, literature of different medieval cultures, and then we've got European literature, and we get into American literature, this whole body of literature. So history and literature, you can imagine, that is a packed container with tons, endless supply of content for schooling. And that gives us 5 more appropriate curriculum subject areas. And these, of course, are the subject areas of the Classical Liberal Arts Academy: the trivium, the quadrivium, philosophy, theology, and the humanities. We need to expand the curriculum of Catholic schools so that the curriculum actually serves what is the true end of Catholic education, which is to lead children to know, love, and serve God. That's the goal of true education, to lead children to the knowledge of God and of his works. That's the definition of wisdom. The curriculum has to provide for that. The curriculum has to provide for those subjects. And what's important, again, is that the modern subjects can all be moved into those 5 containers. So we don't have to act like Amish people or traditionalists and say, we have to get out of the modern curriculum and go back to the old curriculum. That's not true. That's not true. We live in the 21st century. We have to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. We've got to prepare for modern, the modern economy and modern work and so on. We've got to include these modern studies within these containers where we're also adding to that all of the other necessary study that's part of the Catholic life. So you see the challenge of Catholic education, the challenge that I don't think many Catholics are interested in accepting. I know administrators are not interested in it. I know most teachers are not going to be interested in it. The challenge is that a Catholic education is not like the public school education. It is many times deeper, broader, richer, more challenging, more difficult, more time-consuming, more exhausting than the public school curriculum. And this, I believe, is why schools avoid it, because they simply don't want to do the work. The reason why, and this gets back to the first problem, the model, there are not a large number of people who can teach this curriculum. The number of people who can function in this curriculum that I've described are like unicorns. They're very, very few. And that's why for the schools to be fixed, not only does the curriculum need to be changed, that's true. The curriculum needs to be changed, but we have to acknowledge that there will not be a large army of teachers and administrators who can handle this content, who can do this work. There are not going to be large numbers of people who can do this work. And that's why it brings us to the other problem of the model of the school. We cannot build schools where, let's say, the diocesan office opens schools and then just leaves the operation of those schools to hired men, leaves it to administrative staffing, leaves it to a faculty of teachers. Those teachers that are necessary, the quality, the intellectual quality that's needed to teach this curriculum, which is a curriculum proper for Catholic schools, is not going to be found by posting job ads on Indeed.com or Monster.com. You're not going to find people to staff these schools. So the model needs to change, that this curriculum may be restored in schools. It can be easily implemented. Now, how can it be implemented? I'm going to wrap up with the practical answer to how this can be implemented. I'm not a critic. I'm not sitting on social media criticizing bishops and schools. I'm providing an explanation not only of the problem but of the solution, practically speaking. And this is not theoretical. This exists and can be implemented. I've worked for the past 17 years to develop the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy is an online curriculum system, an online lesson or learning management system that provides everything a school needs to offer this curriculum. It provides all of the study materials already divided and broken down for students. All of the necessary study material is provided for this curriculum that I've described: trivium, quadrivium, philosophy, theology, humanities. All of the study materials are already established and provided. It provides all of the assessments, quizzes, written assignments. It provides for the grading of all of these assignments. Yes, it provides for the grading of written assignments. It keeps all of the records. It keeps all of the grades. It provides reporting for all of the students' work. Everything that the kids do in this system is recorded and available through on-demand reports that can be produced at any time. The whole entire system of what's needed for this curriculum to be installed or restored to schools is already available in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy's LMS, our study center. That's what it's designed to do. The school can just implement our study center as their learning management system, and it can keep their records. It can provide all the necessary study materials, quizzes, assignments. Over time, it's going to include lectures and other resources. But that curriculum is accessible. Those big containers are accessible to schools. If they shift their model from this big, lazy, shallow, teacher-centered school model to what I would call an LMS-centered school model, where the school actually has a stable curriculum, stable study materials, stable assessments, stable grading, stable reporting. All of the core functions of the school can be stable. And the actual school community is simply a group of people. And the finances and resources of a community would determine to what extent this can be done. But the people involved in the school would simply be helpers or tutors to the children who help them make progress through this curriculum. So the implementation of this, it's not some far off wacky theorizing about what can be done. We've already established this in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. The Classical Liberal Arts Academy itself is already accredited by Cognia. So if we think about, the classical, that's just not practical. We need accredit. It already is accredited. In fact, when I went through the accreditation process, I constantly pushed back on the evaluation agents and said, we're not going to just move to modern studies. I want you to know that the focus of our curriculum is on these classical subjects, which are not even included in modern schools. And they constantly confirmed that they approved of that and required of us no adaptation of the modern curriculum. So all of that talk that we need to have modern curriculum and we need to do this because of accreditation, it's not true. Our accreditation proves that all of that talk to be false. So in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, we've already restored this curriculum. We've already built this learning management system. We've already customized this learning management system to include all of these tools like automatic grading of assignments. We've taken all of this heavy lifting off of Catholic schools who would work with us and use our program as the foundation for their school activity, for their curriculum. We've already taken off the heaviest work that the administration and faculty needs to do and made the work of operating schools very, very simple. I would say easy. I would even say enjoyable. It allows administrators and teachers, Catholic administrators and teachers, it allows them to do the kinds of things that they actually want to do as teachers. They want to be Catholic teachers. They want to promote Catholic culture. They want to develop relationships with their students and help their students become good Catholic people. That's what they want to do. That's why they're interested in Catholic education. Our program allows a staff in a local Catholic school to devote all of their attention to doing what they actually want to do and what they actually can do. What they can do. Many of them are devout Catholics, great people. They've got their own gifts, their own abilities and talents. They can just be themselves. They don't have to pretend that they're experts in all these different subjects. And they can offer a curriculum that actually supplies the intellectual content for the Catholic culture that they're hoping to share with their students. You can talk about the lives of the saints and say, we study the same things that they studied. It's that kind of real communion of the saints. And we've made it all available. But a school would need to work with us to collaborate, to sort of reorganize the school. And it's not as radical as it may seem. To move away from this like mismatched collection of books and materials that are all gathered from all over the place and assembled in this big mess that's really not a curriculum. Replacing all of that mess with a very simple online learning management system that makes everything accessible, eliminating all that mess, and then just having teachers learn how to make use of the resources in their class time to teach the children, lead them through these things, use the assessments to take care of all of the testing and grading. The teachers don't have to do any of that stuff. And just focus on being teachers, on being Catholic influencers in the lives of Catholic children. And it can be done very cheaply because our program is already built. It's already self-sustaining. We've already developed and built it. And we're happy to let schools use it. I don't know that we can let them use it for free, only because our cost of operation will increase as more and more users are in the system. But we can allow them to use it for very, very, very small fractions of the costs that they're spending for what they're currently doing. And we can take all of that overhead away from the school budget, and what money is available to the school, let them use that to pay for the quality teachers that they need to help influence and mentor and guide the children in the school. The school should primarily be devoting its money to its facilities where the children can meet. We don't need modern school facilities. We don't have to have sports complexes and all this kind of stuff. It's okay to not be good at everything because we've got priorities. We've got more important things to take care of. But the money should be devoted to the necessary facilities where kids can meet and satisfy state, sanitation and safety requirements. And the money should be given to the teachers so that you can actually have quality full-time teachers justly provided for, where they can live a comfortable life with their own families, because we're going to depend on lay people to work. They've got to be well paid. We've got to reduce the number of staff, and you can easily do that by letting go all of the people who are just filling positions that the current school model requires. Let all of the unnecessary people go. Keep the core staff members, the people who really power your school community. Keep them, increase their salaries. Take all of the undesirable work off their plate by outsourcing assignment production and grading and lesson management and all that kind of stuff, and just let them help the children. That's what's necessary to reform Catholic schools. And there's no reason not to do it. It's not a financial problem. It will lower the costs of schools. It's good for the faculty and staff. It will allow for them to enjoy increased salaries by reducing the staff and paying the best teachers more to keep them at the schools because of how valuable they are as influences in the kids' lives. And it can be implemented in no time at all because the system already exists. So I've mentioned two problems in modern Catholic schools that need to be fixed. And I've mentioned how they can be fixed. And I've made it very clear that they can be fixed. So that's all that I can do. I can develop the solution and present it. I can explain it, but I can't force its implementation. If a Catholic school or Catholic school system is interested in learning how this can be implemented, I'm not hard to find. Visit the Classical Liberal Arts Academy website at classicalliberarts.com. Get in touch. We can set up phone conversations, Zoom meeting. I'd be happy to visit and sit down and give you all the time you need to ask questions and talk through things. I am a practical person. I understand that anything we do in this world has to be practical and sustainable, and I think that's the strength of our program. It is practical. It is goal-oriented. It is also sustainable. And I'd like to help you understand that and communicate that and make it happen in your school community. So if you're interested in talking, if you find these videos helpful and you'd like to discuss this further, get in touch. Visit the website at classicalliberarts.com. You can write to me by email directly at mail, M-A-I-L, at classicalliberarts.com. Other contact information is available on the website. So the ball's in your court. Change is possible. The schools can be radically improved. I'm really not going to say any more because what needs to be said has been said. We've got to fix Christian education, and thankfully we can. Let's do it. God bless.